Hello everyone. Propeller-based Ascent systems in Kerbal Space Program have been around for a very long time. They're a staple in the minimalist community as they are very helpful for skipping the dense atmospheres of many of the planets that we like to land on. They also help to get to Kerbin orbit more efficiently since we don't have to deal with fairings and jet engines and intakes and all of that. The problem, as always, with propeller-based descent systems is how you can best get to the highest altitude that you can possibly reach while also minimizing the amount of mass that you need to sacrifice in order to allow for that altitude to be achieved. This is done usually through picking torque values and radii of prop blades that can better align with the altitude that you need at which your rockets will get you to where you're going. Recently, I've made a development, and this will perhaps forever change the way that propeller blades will work in Kerbal Space Program. This new tech is actually relatively simple. It only involves some different rotations of prop blades. I have this relatively standard prop Ascent craft here. Now, in order to activate this effect, all we need to do is start by rotating the prop blades up by 20 degrees, like that, and then rotating them out by 30 degrees, just like that. If we go ahead and launch this craft, we'll see that we do indeed get a very substantial amount of lift. However, if we look at the lift to drag ratio of the actual prop, we'll see that it is inordinately high, on the order of 30 or even more. If we pause the game and take a look at the props, we can see what's happening. Can you see it? The lift vector is actually bent towards the direction that the prop is rotating. In terms of implications, this tech brings a lot to the table. Because the lift vector is pointed in the direction of rotation, we don't need nearly as much torque in order to power the props. This is very important since we can use a wider prop radius with the same amount of torque. Because wider prop radii results in a faster linear tangential velocity of the prop blade, this means that we can get more lift and therefore a higher altitude. The name of the game of prop ascents is to get as high as possible, since the thinner atmosphere allows for less delta V needed to reach orbit. Since this new tech allows for even higher altitudes, its usefulness in minimalist missions should be self-explanatory. Taking this new design into account, I have put together a craft that can go from the surface of Kerbin all the way to Duna and back that only weighs 1,521 kilograms. Now, Bill has in his cargo one EVA pack and a flag panel, which brings the total mass of the mission up to 1,570 kilograms. Now, this craft doesn't use the exact design that I showed in the intro, since that would actually produce a very unstable craft. Instead, I designed it just to make sure that it could reach 460 RPM at the max altitude that I wanted to achieve. I ran into a lot of stability issues with this craft, so unfortunately I wasn't able to achieve that exactly, but it still managed to get me up higher than any other test craft that I had built so far. Part of this issue stems from the so-called intermediate axis theorem, where if the prop RPM got too high, the craft would become unstable and start to tumble. This proved to be a massive issue every single time I tried to work with one of these crafts, and I had to carefully adjust my RPM during the ascent to make sure that I could avoid this perfectly. The ascent on props took a long time, but that is well worth the benefits of getting up this high. Unsure of how stable the craft would be, I decided that at 24 kilometers above sea level, I would activate the rocket engines and stage off the props. The staging is done using the thermal heating from the engines to save mass on the decoupler. Now, you might notice that Bill is clinging onto a ladder, and there is no command chair. The reason for this is, well, I could avoid to skip it. Bill has an EVA pack, which means he is able to let go of the rocket and rendezvous back with it whenever he pleases. So the need for a command chair was gone. Additionally, because ladders don't transfer Kerbal inertia to the parent part, this negates the mass of Bill as well as any cargo that he might have. The rocket-powered portion of this craft consists of one Twitch engine and 4 Oscar tanks that are attached inline, so they produce very low drag, and one Spider engine along with 2 Dumpling fuel tanks. The Twitch engine will get the craft close to orbit, and then the Spider engine will finish the circularization. After staging off the Twitch engine, Bill will be left with the Spider engine and the 2 Dumpling tanks for the rest of the mission. At this point, it became clear to me that I had more than excess delta V to actually do this mission, so I decided to make it a little interesting. Most of my previous minimalist missions involve some horrendously annoying and tedious series of gravity assists. And since I had some extra fuel, I decided that I was not going to use any gravity assists throughout this mission. This made the mission much more challenging, and also indicates that it is very easy to improve. Just taking orbital maneuvers into account, you can save easily around 200 meters per second or more from just the transfer from Kerbin to Duna, so a lot of fuel can be removed from the orbital stage and still have the mission work. With the ejection burn complete, Bill is now en route to Duna. There's a small correction burn that I cut out. It was only around 7 meters per second. And the trend for these maneuvers was to have the craft complete the maneuver, and then Bill would rendezvous back with the craft, grab the ladder, and reset his velocity relative to it. It's at this point that the flag that Bill was bringing along for the ride becomes useful. It's not like the other flags that are being used as landing gear, since this is actually a flag panel. The reason why a flag panel was required for this mission is because the flag panels actually produce way more drag than you would think. This is great not only for aero capturing or aero braking, but also for landing, since it acts kind of like a parachute. It doesn't slow the craft down nearly as much, but it does save more fuel than would be used if the craft didn't have one. In fact, the flag panel proved so effective at producing drag that I accidentally deorbited on the aero capture pass. This wasn't intended, and I was worried that wherever I would land would not be high enough so that I could make orbit with enough fuel to return to Kerbin, but it turned out to be fine. With Bill safely on the surface, all we need to do now is get out and plant a flag to prove we're here. Now, the altitude that I've landed at 2,700 meters above sea level, this isn't perfect for a takeoff from Duna, so I spent some time pushing the craft up to the summit of a nearby mountain to get just a little bit of extra delta V. This is better because the less air that I have to push through, the less losses I'll have in terms of delta V, and also the more efficient the engines will be, although that is a secondary concern with how thin Duna's atmosphere actually is. After taking some time to observe the night sky, Bill is now ready to return to Duna orbit. The flag panel is left behind, and the solar panel is in Bill's inventory so that it doesn't contribute to the mass of the Ascent or any drag. Other than that, the Ascent was fairly unremarkable. There wasn't a whole lot of things that I had to take into account since I had more than enough delta V to return to Kerbin at this point, and the piloting itself was very simple. Room for improvement here is pretty large since there are some mountains that are easy to get to on Duna that exceed 6 kilometers in altitude, but I didn't worry about that this time around, so that is something that you, the viewer, can improve upon. With Bill safely in orbit, all that's left is to set course home for Kerbin. I jumped the gun on the Ascent here, so The next Duna transfer window wasn't for another few hundred days, so I decided to just eject into an orbit of Kerbal that would get me an encounter within the next couple years. This is certainly an improvement over my previous missions where I would spend literal decades waiting for the optimal transfer window, so I'll go ahead and call this one a win. Now arriving at Kerbin, a couple issues face Bill. For one, there is not enough fuel left in the craft to actually deorbit, and two, Bill is not heat tolerant enough to actually capture. So this is where I'm going to use his EVA pack in order to capture at Kerbin. The EVA pack has plenty of Delta V in it left since I didn't need to use that much of it throughout the mission so far, so it was an easy choice. I still ended up trying to see if Bill's drag would be enough to make a substantial difference in the capture burn, but it didn't seem like it was working, so I just finished the rest of the capture with the EVA pack. Now captured at Kerbin, it's time for Bill to perform some aero brakes down into low Kerbin orbit. A Mun assist snuck its way in here, and there wasn't a whole lot I could do to avoid it, so I just made sure that my periapsis didn't change too much and continued on with the aero brakes. It was during the aero braking passes that I realized that Bill was not going to be able to survive Kerbin reentry. There wasn't enough fuel left in his EVA pack to properly slow down, and with his heat tolerance being as low as it is, there wasn't much I could do about it. Bill, however, had an idea cooking up, and he decided that he would be the first ever transgender Kerbal in the history of the Kerbal Space Program. No, this isn't just for the sake of being funny or making a political statement. This is a very real thing that I had to do in order to make this mission possible. When I started this mission, I hadn't yet discovered that female Kerbals can actually survive Kerbin reentry, whereas male Kerbals cannot, so I hadn't started with a female engineer. Because the only difference that this change would have made throughout the mission is the Kerbin reentry and other miscellaneous heating-related moments throughout the mission, I figured that this change shouldn't be disallowed. Even given this, Billiana would not have been able to survive the reentry completely on her own. Even with 4x physical time warp, female Kerbals just can't radiate heat fast enough in order to survive reentry unpowered, at least not using any trajectory that I have found so far. Thankfully, we do still have enough fuel left in the EVA pack to slow down enough that the heating will not overtake her. Something interesting that I noticed during this descent was that Billiana was going way faster than I would have expected. Usually the terminal velocity of a Kerbal is around 30 meters per second at sea level, however, she was going at almost 50. I figured that maybe this was because she's going feet first, but I'll leave that up for you guys to speculate. And with that, in just under 5 years, the mission from the surface of Kerbin to Duna and back with the craft weighing less than 1.6 tons has been completed. This is quite a substantial improvement, but there is still a lot on the table for future improvements, and I can't wait to see who takes the record and where it goes next. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks for watching.